More US Marines are being sent to Syria to fight ISIL. And ISIL fighters in Iraq are being attacked by American-backed forces. So what's the endgame for the US offensive? And how does it coordinate with other key players, including Russia and Turkey? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. US troops are getting more involved in the push to take over Mosul and Raqqa, ISIL's strongholds in Iraq and Syria. But as fighting continues, the Americans face many challenges in an area where other key players are becoming deeply involved to defend their interests. Hashim Al-Barra has more.
The fight against ISIL is entering a new phase. Key regional players are stepping up their campaign. The Russians, the Turks and the Americans. Their goal is to drive ISIL out of its strongholds. The city of Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria. Iraq's Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi promised to launch cross-border operations to target anyone who poses a threat.
I would like to say frankly that with all my respect to other countries, I will not hesitate to target terrorists' positions in neighbouring countries that pose a threat to Iraq.
But Raqqa has become a crowded theatre of war. These are US Marines on the ground within artillery range of ISIL gunners. They're not the only US troops on the ground. Another small contingent of American forces are in nearby Manbij to what they describe as keep the peace between the Kurdish and the Turkish fighters. US advisors help train the Kurdish SDF or Syrian Democratic Forces. The growing alliance has angered the Turkish government. It considers the Syrian Kurdish fighters an extension of the PKK. The Kurdistan Workers' Party is considered a terrorist organization in Turkey. And Turkey has also trained a group of Syrian rebels in the fight against ISIL in Raqqa. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Tuesday Turkish forces will not compromise and will not fight alongside the Kurds. A message reiterated by the Turkish Prime Minister.
We have told our interlocutors that in the fight against ISIL, one cannot go anywhere with groups which have an agenda that is against Syria's unity and integrity. Therefore, it is unfortunate that some of our allies have selected terrorist organizations as partners.
Turkish, Russian and American military commanders continue to discuss ways to set aside differences and lead the fight against ISIL, a fight many believe won't be an easy one.
I don't expect ISIL to suddenly collapse from a lack of morale. Like I said, there's a portion that will break and run. The rest of them will fight as ordered or fight to the death.
The US is committing more troops on the ground in Iraq and Syria, a departure from its policy for almost a decade. Hashim Al-Barra for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our panel now to talk more about this. From London, we have Andreas Krieg. He is Assistant Professor at the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. On the Turkey-Syria border, we're joined by Nowar Bonsey. He is a Senior Syria Analyst at the International Crisis Group. And lastly, from London, we have Mamoun Abu Nowar, a retired Jordanian Air Force General and Military Analyst. Good to have you all with us. Andreas Krieg, is there a danger here with this new deployment of American forces of what is known as mission creep, this idea that the involvement starts off with a small number of what are called advisors, and then they add more troops who go into battle, and then more after that, and pretty soon it becomes a full-scale invasion. Is there a danger of this here on the part of the US?
Well, I wouldn't say that this is going to be, there's a danger of a massive escalation here and a full-scale invasion as we've seen in Iraq in 2003 or in Afghanistan. But what we do see is a part of a proxy war or a surrogate war that's being fought on all sides. And one of the major dangers that you have there is you start off by supporting certain groups, training, equipping them, and then letting them fight. And then you realize down the line that they're not actually able to clear these objectives or achieve the objectives that you want them to achieve. And then you have to step up the game. And this is what's happening right now. America has made a commitment now to the SDF and the YPG, making sure that whatever America has invested already into northeast Syria, that this stake will not get lost, will not be lost again. And by clearly showing that they're on the ground, you know, flying the flag, they show that they're there, and there's no deniability anymore, which means they're there, and any withdrawal now would be seen as a defeat. So this is a major commitment by the Americans, and if it means that they have to step up the game even more in order to maintain their foothold on the ground, then they will have to do that. So definitely it's an escalation on the side of the Americans.
Nowar Bonsey, you're joining us from the Turkey-Syria border, and for security reasons, we're not giving your exact location. But just based on what you've seen there on the ground, what is your assessment of the situation there, and whether these increased deployment of U.S. Marines is going to make any difference in defeating ISIL?
Well, certainly the additional U.S. support can make a difference in the battle for Raqqa itself. But I agree with the first guest that the broader challenge here goes well beyond the Battle of Raqqa. The U.S. is narrowly focused on achieving quick tactical and territorial gains against ISIS. But every other player in this field, Turkey, the YPG, and which is an affiliate of the PKK, the Syrian regime, Russia, Iran, everybody else is a bit more focused on longer-term strategic goals, figuring out who rules what within Syria. And it's very difficult for the US to get both its partners and its competitors to set aside those longer-term, more strategic goals to focus on the immediate gains against ISIS. And so what we see right now is the US is basically trying to referee between its Turkish ally on one hand and its Kurdish YPG ally on the other. And they may be able in the short run to prevent an escalation in clashes. Very unclear how sustainable that will be. And there's certainly a risk that the US may be dragged further in.
Yeah, let's pick up on that point with Mamoun Abu Nowar. I mean, how difficult is it going to be, or rather how realistic is it for these forces to think they can just sort of go in, do what they need to do and get out? I mean, how difficult is it going to be to hold this territory from ISIL?
The situation as a whole is very messy, but I think the mission of the American there is been changing from train, assist, provide to sort of reassure and deter any conflict between these parties. You get the Russian, the Syrian, SDF, and the American now in around Manbij area and the outskirts of Manbij against the Turk. To be realistic in a way by analyzing the situation. I think Turkey is now mistrust the American in a way, but I think with the Antalya meeting, they got to some understanding about how they gonna keep the thing cool, not to escalate it further. The American, I don't think will see any mission creep or increase of forces there. I expect that they're going to rely fully on the locals, maybe SDF to like besieged Manbij or Raqqa, and some like Arab GCC country and Arab coalition or might get involved in Raqqa attack. But all that depend now on the situation also in Mosul. What's the end game in Mosul will be, which is going to be, it's a matter of time to be followed, and with this human catastrophe and desperate people going out of Mosul. So I think what we're going to see is Raqqa also will fall, God knows when, month or so, though you have got like 6,000 ISIL fighters in Raqqa there, and SDF did well. But at the same time, these people, they will not give up. You will see like guerrilla warfare, I could see myself instability in the whole area. Or this is the beginning of a division of Syria even. And the American play a role of stabilization force with the peacekeeping in the future to de-escalate the conflict and to start with the political situation. But ISIS will not disappear just like that. They will lose territory. They cannot fight on all fronts. And that's normal, they lose this territory, but they will keep on doing this guerrilla fight, insurgency, and like, I could see like army of lone wolf attack. It's globally, they gonna go globally, or in our part of the world. So things will not be stable.
Let's show you a couple of graphics now. First of all, taking a look at who controls what in Syria. Most of the territory ISIL controls is in and around Raqqa. It is uninhabited desert containing major oil fields. Kurdish groups control areas in the north, and they also include Al-Bab and Manbij near the border with Turkey. The Syrian government controls all major urban centers in the west, including the capital Damascus. Let's take a look now at some of the forces battling ISIL in Syria and how much manpower they have. Now, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which includes the Kurdish YPG fighters, is backed by the US. Last December, the US Defense Department said the SDF alliance had 45,000 fighters, around a third of them Arab. The Free Syrian Army, which is backed by the Turkish government, is also battling ISIL. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights estimating it has 30 to 40,000 fighters. And on ISIL's side, their numbers, a US commander saying last August that fighting has reduced its ranks from 45,000 to 15,000. So, Andreas, Krieg, if I come back to you on this, just from showing that map there of who controls what, and we've covered some of this a little bit as well, there is a kind of delicate balance here with the US in putting these forces on the ground, but it's at the same time recognizing all of the other parties that have a stake in this and not wanting to get caught up in that. How difficult is that going to be to deal with?
Exactly, a very, very difficult task. As you know, in the military, we usually divide operations into three different levels: the strategic, the operational, and the tactical. And I think what we need to understand here that it's very, very difficult to, even though we have seen a strategic communication between Turkey, Russia, and America, and thereby indirectly also with the regime, with what happened 3 days ago in Antalya, but that does not really translate one-to-one into communication and coordination on the operational and particularly on the tactical level. These surrogates on the ground, whether it's the SDF, the YPG, the FSA, and other forces, are not embedded into the chain of command of any of their patrons or sponsors, which means neither Turkey nor the Americans can really fully control their sponsors. So how do you, their surrogates. So how do you actually control them and make sure that they do not attack each other, which is almost impossible. So the only way to do this is basically put Americans on the front line or put Russians on the front line between the two parties, which is what's happening at the moment, and make sure that any attack on from FSA forces, which are backed by Turkey, onto SDF forces, which are backed by the Americans, relate to a direct attack from Turkey towards the Americans. So it's a very convoluted, highly contested area, very difficult to coordinate. And that is going to be the major issue. Tactically, on the very ground, you cannot control each small unit that is operating and walking around. And they might just decide to take a certain city, to take a certain town outside of Manbij, which is controlled by the SDF or controlled by the FSA, and there will be clashes continuing. So, and that is going to be the major difficulty. How do you translate strategic coordination between Turkey, Russia, and the US onto into tactical outcomes or operational coordination?
Yeah, Noah Bonsey, how difficult is that going to be? How delicate is this for the US? Because when you look at the Kurds in Syria, the YPG, they have been the most effective at fighting ISIS, but Turkish forces, as we've been saying, have been attacking them, and Turkey is, of course, a NATO ally of the United States. So how do the US forces deal with that delicate balance?
Well, the challenge that the Americans have is that if they want to move on Raqqa quickly, they have judged that the only force prepared to help them do that and to take the lead on the ground is the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, dominated by the Kurdish YPG. That will, as you mentioned, inevitably anger Turkey. Turkey's already made that very clear, has been trying to prevent this. But ultimately, the US is likely to move ahead at any rate. And they'll do their best to offer assurances to Turkey and perhaps offer other things to Turkey that might placate Ankara. There are a number of risks here, however. I mean, one, taking the city will be difficult. Likely they will achieve it. Holding it will be difficult. This is a major city. It's very important symbolically to ISIS. And it's roughly 3 times the size of Manbij, which took 2.5 months for the SDF to conquer. It will also be more difficult to hold. The Kurdish forces within the SDF may be less welcome in Raqqa than they have been elsewhere. So a number of risks of simply holding the territory. And then there's also the risk of Turkey escalating simultaneously, either to thwart the operation by attacking the SDF elsewhere, perhaps in Manbij, or potentially escalating elsewhere in an attempt to overstretch YPG forces. So a number of problems that can't be resolved immediately.
Mamoun Abu Nowar, how important is Raqqa strategically for ISIL? If they lose that, then what happens next? They're not simply going to melt away, are they?
No, of course not. But let me say that Turkey is dialing back, and also that affects its buffer zone, or the the 5,000 kilometer square area to prevent the linking of cantons of the Kurdish self-government in the future. So I think there is this dimension which they want to decrease or prevent expansion of the Turkish sphere of influence in northern Syria. And that's what, there's some sort of understanding between Russia and America concerning that matter. As Raqqa is concerned, it's very strategic. It is the capital. So they want to give a freeze fight, I think, ISIL, with all kind of tactics they use, improvised mines, booby traps, snipers, all kind of thing. But that will not be the end of the game for ISIL. You got Deir ez-Zor, also another problem. You need manpower to do that. The SDF cannot do this with the American, even with the pact. If we take the scenario that the American would not have any mission creep in this area. So the only thing is you got from south of Jordan, like the French, German, and the Polish, with the Jordanian troops possibly to go for Deir ez-Zor and to besiege it or to play some active role in that part of the world. Then ISIL will diminish slowly, but as I said before, they will stay for a long time in our part of the world. Because there is, if you don't, especially in the Iraqi thing, this sectarian type of war which is going on between Shia, Sunni, etc., this will lead to instability for a long time. So I think the unity of Iraq and the unity of Syria need a stabilization force, and the Americans should not leave the area very quickly, or when they finish Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, or Mosul even, to keep things stable for a long time, and Andreas, not to repeat the history on Iraq.
Andreas, Krieg, how are the Russians going to be looking at this? I mean, we've talked a bit about Turkey and how they're going to see this, but how is Russia likely to view an increased presence of US forces in this area of Syria?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And I want to talk about something that the second speaker said before. The interesting aspect here is I don't think the Americans are trying to mediate between Turkey and Russia. It's the other way around. The Russians are actually mediating between the Turks and the Americans, which is an interesting development because both of them are actually NATO countries. And I think the Russians are looking, they like the situation of being called upon. They definitely have they probably have the biggest stake in this war at the moment, even though it's completely out of their area or direct area of influence. It's the Middle East. But for them, it's a great development that they're being called upon as a partner by the Americans and also by the Turks. So they have a stake in that war. I don't see, because the northeastern part is not part of the core of Russian influence in Syria. What Russia wants to do in Syria is more towards Latakia, Aleppo, Damascus, making sure that the regime retains the kind of strongholds that it has at the moment. So the northeastern Kurdish zones is not really a core area that Russia wants to fight for. So if someone else is popping in, which is now the Americans, to establish a zone, a sphere of influence there, that doesn't really go at the expense of Russian interests in Syria. The most important point now for the Russians is make sure that Assad survives and that ISIS, and ISIS being the biggest threat, ISIS does not survive. So if the Americans help them achieve this, particularly in cooperation, which seems to be in cooperation with Russia and cooperation indirectly with the Assad regime, then this is a great development. Also, we shouldn't, I think the Trump administration doesn't really have a foreign policy in Syria at the moment. So they do it, they form that foreign policy as it goes. So I think the Russians here now have created a situation where the Americans can go in and do what they have to do, and do that in partnership with the regime. I think there's a major turn here. The Americans are willing to indirectly deal with the Assad regime, which is a major turning point from where the Obama administration was. So that is definitely in favor of the Russians.
Nowar Bonsey, are we looking at an eventual partitioning of Syria here, with more of the major powers being involved in the country? Because it does seem as if no side has really gained the upper hand, that there is an increasing stalemate. So is there going to be some sort of carving up of areas of control, some kind of loose autonomy, if you like?
Yeah, I think loose autonomy might be the right term. I wouldn't go so far as partition, because the one thing that almost everyone in the region can agree on is they don't want a partitioning of Syria. But if looking realistically at the map of who controls what and the conflicting objectives between them, the only way this war can be wound down in the short to midterm will involve a heavy decentralization, basically some degree of autonomy, de facto or otherwise, among forces on the ground. You have major chunks of Syria controlled by Kurdish YPG-dominated forces, particularly in the northeast, backed by the US. You have obviously the regime with its Iranian and Russian backers controlling much of the west and other parts of the country. The northwest is still dominated by a range of rebel groups, half of which roughly are closely allied with Ankara. You have the Euphrates Shield, in which Ankara is taking a lead role on the ground and controlling significant territory alongside its rebel allies. So ultimately, you're going to need to have Turkish interests accounted for, Russian and Iranian interests accounted for, YPG and even US interests accounted for. There's no way to do that with a winner-take-all scenario. There will need to be a level of decentralization enabling basically spheres of influence with external players, all the external forces I just mentioned, acting as guarantors. I think this is the most realistic scenario to wind things down. But we're nowhere near that point at this stage.
Mamoun Abu Nowar, if we look at if we compare this to what's happening with the fight against ISIL in Iraq, the US forces there are playing a much bigger part because they are there with the consent and the cooperation of the Iraqi government there. So if ISIL is defeated there, how does that position them in Syria? Does there need to be any further coordination, do you think?
Yes, concerning the matter, but I think the strategy which the American using now is not fixed strategy, and I think it's going to develop with time according to the situation. So that will also remain to be seen. But Mosul, I think, I don't know, it's a matter of time, weeks, months, I don't know. Nobody can predict that, but it's going to fall, of course. And that's what affect badly ISIL operation as a whole. Yes. Financial-wise, line of communication, but to secure 600 kilometers border length, it's not easy between Syria and Iraq. You need armies to control these areas. So, as I said before, it's going to be a guerrilla war in Iraq and in Syria also for a long time to come.
All right, and on that, we're going to have to leave it to Andreas Krieg, Nowar Bonsey, and Mamoun Abu Nowar. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. As always, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/Al AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.